Hi again then guys, and welcome back to another look into the Project Gotham franchise, in particular to Project Gotham 3, once again, to consider not just some of the cars which are totally unique to the game, but some which are really good, which just aren't featured on that many games. So they might be featured elsewhere, and that's the case for this car, the Noble M400. Now, as far as Project Gotham 3 goes, this is one of the most attainable performance cars in the game, because the price tag is only 85 grand, which incidentally puts it on par with the Honda NSX GT2, which is a pretty good rival for it. Now, the car as a whole spawned from a great essential idea, and that is the idea of Noble as a whole, and even before Noble, as we've spoken about before on the channel in Unsung Heroes, from the Ascari days. Yes, the other company, Ascari. With the Ascari Ecosse, designed by the same guy, Lee Noble, and just like with Warren Mosler, with the Mosler company, one great core idea can be reused and refined over and over again to make a vehicle's concept, which was initially brilliant, get better and better. And just like with the Mosler MT900 or the Ascari Ecosse, the Noble M400 is just that. Now, it's easy to think of Noble now, especially for maybe younger petrol heads, as being just the M600. That's the obvious one to go for. It's the big bad Noble. But before that, they made some other incredible cars. Don't forget about the M14, the M15, the M400, which is of course this one, and where it all began really, the M12 GTO. There was also of course an open-top version, the GTC, which didn't ultimately reach fruition, but they all use the same essential concepts. And once again with the Ascari, as I said. But this car is kind of the pinnacle of that first generation Noble idea, before they started to add stuff like more creature comforts, more thought of quality, more thought of luxury to some degree. Not overly luxurious, but the M14 was more of that kind of idea, the M15 as well, and of course the M600, compared to these, feels like much more of a full-on true supercar, whereas this initial generation feels like exactly what it is, a pure, hardcore, track day super sports car, but one which you can get pretty early on in the game. Now, the engine in this one is a 2.8 litre, it puts out 425 horsepower, which is of course more than the M12, given that the M400 is the next step after the M12, and the weight is very, very low, 1,059 kilos. And of course, this is a pretty similar vehicle in some ways to a car which we discussed earlier today on Forza 2, the Proton Motors Spira, or the Olam Spira. Neither car has a huge amount of power, comparatively speaking, but they are lightweight, mid-engine, rear-wheel drive, track-biased sports cars, and that gives them kind of a unique place on the market as being this left field choice which can genuinely take on, and in some cases even best, much more established and more respected, in some cases, rivals. Because when many people think of a super sports track car, you probably wouldn't think of Noble first. Some people would, but most people wouldn't. You might think of something like a Gallardo Superleggera, or a Lamborghini SV, or a Ferrari Scuderia, or a 360 Challenge, at least around this kind of time. Now though, you have this radically different option. This Noble M400, which of course had already made a name for itself with the preceding M12. But the great thing about this car is that, just like, once again, the Mosler MT900, it doesn't need any kind of crazy frills, any fancy gimmicks. It's just a really good essential core concept, which in itself doesn't seem that radically different, but what it does very well. And that is being an all-round track car. The top speed is more than good enough, the acceleration is great, and the handling, although in the real world not necessarily that beginner-friendly, on a game compared to many other supercars, it actually does feel pretty beginner-friendly, of course depending on how realistic the game is. But it's a perfect entry level into the Project Gotham style of driving and the style of cars that you will end up driving, because in many ways the Noble is kind of like a watered-down supercar. But as I said earlier, it can sometimes beat supercars. If you compare, for instance, the newest iteration, the M600, if you compare that to a lot of other supercars with similar kind of specs, especially with regard to power, it's often faster than many of them because of that essential idea, which then just gets turned up to 11. Because when you have a great idea, you can then just keep refining it, adding a bit more power, dropping the weight a little bit more, maybe give it a bit more downforce, and just make it better and better. And this was kind of the start of that for Noble specifically, because the M12 was already great, but the M400 refined the concept, and then after that, of course, it went in a different direction. So in a weird kind of way, this is kind of like the first generation Zonda from Pagani. The M12 is like the original C12 Zonda. It introduced people to the concept of what Noble was all about. But then, just like how the Zonda became the C12S 7.3 in that first generation, this one became the M400. And of course, it's a different car to a Pagani, but in that kind of sense, it does have some similarities, for sure. As far as its place in the game as a whole, it's a pretty strong car. It's not going to take you all the way through career mode, of course, but it's a strong one, nonetheless. 85 grand, you get a whole lot for that, and the car definitely lives up to its name because it has 401 horsepower per tonne, which, for a car that doesn't have a ridiculous amount of power to begin with, is a good level to be at. In the real world, these first generation Nobles are kind of rare. You don't see a huge amount of them. I believe I've only ever seen one on the road, and I think it was the M12. But when you do see one, just like some others like the MG SVR or the TVR Sagaris, it always feels special. That special occasion of seeing this unicorn, if you will, of the super sports car world. The difference is, unlike many unicorns, the Noble, in any form, but in particular here the M400, is one which can actually deliver on its potential. So it's definitely worth checking out, and it's, relatively speaking, a car that's easy to overlook, because it is a bit more lower in the game. Overall though, that's it for this particular pick. Of course, I'll see you guys next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.